The endless stretch of space was silent, a vast and eternal void where stars flickered like distant embers against the cold abyss. At the farthest edge of the known universe, a cosmic anomaly raged, its immense gravity field pulling in debris, asteroids, and whole sections of planetary systems. It was a wild, chaotic force that stretched the boundaries of time and space itself. And it was here, at this uncharted precipice, that humanity would face its most decisive moment. The Terran Alliance had heard the call. The Zalari, a technologically superior alien species, had advanced to the precipice of their conquest, setting their sights on humanity's solar system. The Terran ships, crafted by the finest minds Earth had to offer, were no match for the Zalari's immense fleet. Their battlecruisers, carriers, and dreadnoughts outnumbered the Alliance's forces 10-1. But humanity had one thing that the Zalari lacked: an unyielding will to survive. Admiral Serafina Holt stood on the bridge of Vanguard, the flagship of the Terran fleet. Her broad shoulders squared in the face of imminent doom, the gleaming black surface of the starship reflecting the light of distant suns. The stars outside seemed to blur into streams of light as the fleet approached the anomaly, a massive black hole that had become the battleground of the last Great War. "The Zalari are here," her first officer, Lieutenant Kyle Orwin, reported, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "They've deployed their flagship, Seraphim's Wrath. It's already been spotted at the outer edge." Serafina's lips tightened. The Seraphim's Wrath was a dreadnought-class warship, a monstrosity that could obliterate anything in its path. It was the crown jewel of the Zalari fleet, a symbol of their unmatched superiority. But Serafina's eyes narrowed as she stared at the hollow map, a complex grid of moving ships and scattered asteroids. The situation was dire, but it wasn't over yet. "The rest of their fleet is coming in fast," Kyle added, tapping the console in front of him. "We don't have much time." "I know," Serafina replied, her voice firm. She turned to the crew, her expression fierce. "Prepare for battle stations. I don't care if they outnumber us. Today we'll show them that humanity will never surrender." Across the fleet, the calls for readiness echoed in unison. Across the comms, other captains rallied their crews, the weight of their mission pressing down on them all. They knew what was at stake: everything. If they failed, humanity's existence would be erased from the galaxy. It was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the soul of the human race. Out in the distance, a massive ripple in the fabric of space announced the arrival of the Zalari's first wave. The Seraphim's Wrath led the charge, its enormous engines flaring as it tore through space with terrifying speed. The Terran fleet met them head-on, the vast expanse of space now filled with the blinding lights of warships coming to life. "Admiral!" shouted Captain Harlan of the Titan's Spear, one of the battlecruisers in the fleet. "We have a clear shot at their flanks. Shall we engage?" Serafina's eyes flicked to the tactical display, where the silhouettes of the Zalari warships loomed like predators circling their prey. There was no hesitation in her gaze. "Do it," she commanded. "We fight smart, not hard. Let them think we're weaker than we are." The Titan's Spear launched a barrage of plasma missiles, arcing toward the exposed flanks of the Zalari ships. The battle began in an explosion of light, the missiles cutting through space in a deadly dance. The Zalari retaliated quickly, their shields flaring bright blue as they absorbed the brunt of the attack. But the Terrans had already shifted their tactics, using decoys and feints to draw the Zalari forces into a trap. "Admiral, Seraphim's Wrath is locking onto us," Kyle warned. The massive dreadnought unleashed a volley of energy beams that streaked across the battlefield like harbingers of doom. "We've got this," Serafina muttered to herself, gripping the edge of the command chair. Her mind raced as she ordered the fleet into evasive maneuvers. The sheer size of the Seraphim's Wrath was intimidating, but she knew their strength lay in unpredictability. "Charge the ion cannon," she said, a daring glint in her eyes. "Target the Seraphim's Wrath. We need to breach its shields if we're going to have any chance." The crew worked in tandem, their hands flying over controls as the ship's main weapon powered up. The ion cannon thrummed with raw energy, gathering strength as it aimed at the colossal dreadnought. The moment of truth was upon them. Firing in 3, 1. The Terran fleet unleashed a torrent of firepower, the beams crashing into the enemy's shield like a storm. The explosion rippled outward, shaking the very fabric of space. The clash of titans had begun, and there would be no turning back. The battlefield was chaos incarnate. Sparks of energy flared in all directions as the fleets collided in a brilliant explosion of light and fire. The Terran ships danced in unpredictable arcs, weaving through the cosmic wreckage of shattered asteroids and floating debris. Their maneuverability was their greatest strength, a weapon of speed and agility against the immense power of the Zalari dreadnoughts. On the bridge of the Vanguard, Admiral Serafina Holt's fingers hovered over the command console, her mind sharp as a blade. The first volley had hit the Seraphim's wrath hard, its shields flickering but holding firm. The Zalari flagship retaliated with a devastating counterstrike, sending a wave of energy beams crashing into the Terran battle lines. Yet, the Vanguard had already executed a rapid evasive maneuver, and the deadly beams barely grazed its port side. "Admiral," Lieutenant Kyle Orwin's voice cut through the noise. "We've taken heavy damage to the starboard flank. A direct hit from one of their dreadnoughts. Shields are at 40%. Serafina's jaw tightened. The Seraphim's wrath was a beast, but humanity had something the Zalari didn't: the resolve to fight against all odds. The ion cannon had done its job. The shield's outer layer was weakened, but the ship's core was still protected. It was only a matter of time before they could break through entirely. "Captain Harlan," Serafina called over the comms, her voice cool but urgent. "I need you to take the Titan spear in close. Draw their fire away from us, create a diversion." There was a brief pause before the captain responded, his voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "Understood, Admiral. We'll give you the opening you need." The Titan spear, a massive battlecruiser brimming with firepower, peeled away from the fleet, its engines roaring as it plummeted toward the heart of the Zalari formation. It was a risky move, placing the ship in the crosshairs of several Zalari dreadnoughts, but it would buy the Vanguard the time needed to unleash a devastating final strike. As the Titan spear closed the gap with the enemy, a barrage of plasma bolts streaked from the Zalari ships, lighting up the dark expanse of space. The Titan spear took the full brunt of the assault, its hull creaking under the strain as energy shields flickered out of existence. The ship's defensive measures struggled, barely keeping up with the overwhelming firepower of the Zalari. "Hang on, Harlan." Serafina gritted her teeth. The Titan spear was taking a beating, but it was buying precious seconds. Just a little longer. Out of the corner of her eye, Serafina noticed something, an anomaly. A flicker in the corner of the battlefield, a shadow in the distance. The Seraphim's wrath was powering up its main weapon, a colossal energy cannon capable of reducing an entire fleet to ash in the blink of an eye. If it fired now, it would decimate everything in its path. "Damn it." Serafina cursed, her eyes locking onto the approaching weapon. "Kyle, get us in position now. We can't let them fire that thing." With a frantic motion, Kyle input the necessary commands, and the Vanguard lurched forward. The bridge crew scrambled to keep pace with the sudden change in trajectory, every hand on deck working in synchronization. The ship tilted on its axis, just as the Seraphim's wrath unleashed its devastating energy beam. The shot was a blinding flash of white, an unstoppable wave of destruction that screamed through the vacuum of space. But Serafina had anticipated the move. With seconds to spare, the Vanguard tilted sharply, narrowly avoiding the brunt of the blast. The beam sailed past, obliterating one of the smaller Terran ships in its wake, but leaving the Vanguard untouched. Serafina's breath came in sharp, controlled gasps. The ship had been inches from destruction. But there was no time to rest. The Seraphim's wrath would reload the weapon in moments. "We have to finish this now." Serafina's voice rang out with cold determination. "Admiral, the Titan spear has reached the edge of their formation." Captain Harlan's voice crackled over the comms. "We're pulling out. They've got us cornered, but we've given you the opening." "Take care, Harlan," Serafina replied, her heart heavy. The Titan spear had been a valiant sacrifice, but its crew would not die in vain. Without hesitation, Serafina turned to her crew. "Activate the ion cannon. Aim for the Seraphim's wrath's weak spot. We only have one shot." As the Vanguard slid into position, the massive ion cannon hummed with power, crackling with the energy of 1,000 storms. The targeting system locked onto the weakened section of the Zalari dreadnought's shield, the vulnerability now exposed. "Fire!" Serafina ordered. The blast erupted from the Vanguard, tearing through the void in a beam of searing light. The Seraphim's wrath shook under the force of the strike, the outer layers of its shield disintegrating with a violent flare. But before the ship could fully buckle, the Zalari retaliated with a swift counterattack, a barrage of energy fire so concentrated that it seemed to warp the very fabric of space. Serafina held her breath, watching as the battle for humanity's survival played out before her eyes. The odds were still stacked against them, but the war was far from over. The battle raged on, the vacuum of space filled with flashes of light and the deafening roar of energy discharges. The Vanguard had scored a critical blow, but it came at a heavy price. The Seraphim's Wrath had taken damage, its massive shields finally beginning to crack. However, the retaliatory strike from the Zalari was devastating. The Terran fleet had never faced an enemy so relentless, so precise. Every moment was a struggle for survival. "Admiral, the Seraphim's Wrath is firing again." Kyle Orwin's voice rang out across the bridge, panic creeping into his tone. "They're targeting our engines." Seraphina's eyes shot to the main screen. The Zalari dreadnought had unleashed another deadly beam, a deadly arc of light aimed directly at the heart of the Vanguard. The ship's rear thrusters flared, but the blast was too close. A jolt rocked the Vanguard, throwing everyone on the bridge forward. Sparks exploded from the consoles, and the lights flickered briefly before stabilizing. "Status report," Seraphina barked. Lieutenant Orwin quickly ran his fingers over the console, sweat beading on his forehead. "The rear engines are heavily damaged, Admiral. We've lost power to the aft sections. Shields are at 25%. Seraphina clenched her fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. The Vanguard wasn't finished yet. The war wasn't lost, not yet. They still had a chance. "Power up the forward shields," Seraphina commanded. "We're going to need every bit of defense we can muster." As the crew scrambled to execute the orders, Seraphina's mind raced. She could feel the weight of every decision, every moment. Her fleet was crumbling, and even with their ingenuity and grit, they couldn't sustain this battle much longer. The Seraphim's Wrath was still an enormous threat, its weaponry capable of turning the tide in an instant. But humanity had faced impossible odds before. "Admiral," Kyle said, his voice suddenly more measured. "We've detected something, an anomaly near the core of the Seraphim's Wrath." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "What kind of anomaly?" "Something's interfering with their weapon systems," Kyle replied, typing rapidly. "It's small, but there's a pattern forming. The Seraphim's Wrath has been forced to recalibrate its energy output every few seconds. It's unstable." That caught Seraphina's attention. If they could exploit the instability, they might have a chance to land a decisive blow. "Can we disrupt it further?" Kyle's fingers flew over the controls as he analyzed the data. "Yes, if we can target their central conduit, we can overload their system, causing a cascading failure." Seraphina didn't hesitate. "Do it." She turned to the tactical officer. "Lieutenant, give me a course. We need to get in close to the Seraphim's Wrath. And when we do, I want that conduit destroyed, no matter the cost." The tactical officer nodded, adjusting the navigation systems. "Aye, Admiral. Plotting course now." The Vanguard groaned under the strain of the damaged engines as it pivoted, inching closer to the Seraphim's Wrath. The Zalari dreadnought, meanwhile, was preparing for its next barrage. Its energy cannons began to glow with lethal intent. "Brace for impact," Seraphina shouted as the Vanguard accelerated toward the massive ship. "Admiral, we can't take another direct hit," Kyle warned, his voice taut with urgency. "The Vanguard can't withstand another blast like the last one." Seraphina's jaw clenched. She could see it, the shimmering blue glow of the Zalari weaponry beginning to charge once more. There was no more room for hesitation. "Fire at will," she commanded. The Vanguard's remaining energy weapons fired in rapid succession. The blasts rocketed toward the Seraphim's Wrath, but the Zalari flagship's shields flared back to life, deflecting the attack with ease. However, Seraphina had no intention of engaging in a prolonged exchange of firepower. Instead, she focused all her energy on the ship's trajectory. "Target the conduit. We only need a single shot." The distance between the two ships closed rapidly. At this range, the Zalari's weapons were nearly impossible to avoid, but the Vanguard's agility gave it an edge. It twisted and banked, evading the first volley of energy blasts. The crew's tension was palpable as the seconds ticked away. Then, there it was. A break in the Zalari's defense. The Seraphim's Wrath's energy system sputtered, its weapons faltering. It was the opening they had been waiting for. "Now!" Seraphina shouted, her voice cutting through the tension of the bridge. The Vanguard's main cannon charged one final time, its ion blast hurtling toward the central conduit of the Seraphim's Wrath. Time seemed to slow as the blast struck the target. A blinding explosion erupted across the battlefield. For a moment there was only silence. Then the shockwave hit. The Seraphim's Wrath lurched violently, its form shaking as the outer layers of its hull began to disintegrate. A series of smaller explosions rippled across its surface, spreading across its sleek frame like the spreading tendrils of fire. "Direct hit," Kyle shouted, his voice filled with a mix of disbelief and triumph. The Zalari dreadnought trembled once more as the damage spread. Sparks and flickers of energy cascaded across the structure. Seraphina's heart pounded as she waited, watching for any sign that the Seraphim's wrath would hold together or crumble. Then the unthinkable happened. The Zalari flagship's weapon systems flickered one final time, and a massive internal explosion tore through its core. The mighty ship broke apart, scattering debris across the battlefield. Seraphina exhaled sharply. The Seraphim's wrath was no more. But the war was far from over. "Admiral," Lieutenant Orwin said quietly, "the remaining Zalari fleet is retreating. They're pulling back." For the first time in hours, Seraphina allowed herself a small breath of relief. They had done the impossible. But the cost had been great and the battle was still far from won. The Zalari were not finished, they would return. And when they did, humanity would be ready. The edge of hope had just become the beginning of a long war. The remnants of the Seraphim's wrath drifted in space, its once proud form broken into jagged shards of metal and fire. The explosion had been a testament to humanity's defiance, a fierce, glorious moment of victory. Yet, as the wreckage of the Zalari flagship lingered in the void, the victory felt hollow. The remaining Zalari fleet was retreating, but Seraphina knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Vanguard was battered. Its once glossy hull now bore the marks of heavy combat, burned plating, scorched systems, and the ever-present hum of damage alarms echoing through the corridors. Yet, the ship had held together, defying the odds in ways even Seraphina hadn't imagined. The crew was weary, but their resolve remained unbroken. Admiral Seraphina Holt stood in the quiet aftermath on the bridge, the stars outside now seeming too still in contrast to the carnage of moments before. The destruction was immense, but the price of survival was high. Her crew had proven their strength, but now they needed to rebuild and fast. "Report," Seraphina said, her voice steady but with a tired edge. "How bad is it?" Lieutenant Orwin looked up from the console, his face pale, but his expression professional. "The Vanguard is holding together, but we've lost a significant portion of our shields. The rear engines are completely offline. We've had multiple breaches on Deck 4, but nothing that can't be patched up in a few hours. Our firepower is down about 20%. "Good. We'll survive," Seraphina said with quiet certainty. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind churned. The Zalari had retreated, but only for now. Their fleet was vast. Their technology terrifyingly advanced. They would rebuild their forces and they would come again. The question was not if, but when. She turned to her communications officer. "Any word from the other fleets?" The comms officer's face was grim. "Admiral, Fleet Command reports heavy losses in the outer sectors. The Zalari are regrouping, likely to launch a counterattack. They've made it clear, they'll return with greater force." Seraphina nodded, her heart heavy. "Prepare to move out," she said. "We can't wait for them to regroup. We'll need to hit them first." Orwin met her gaze with quiet understanding. "You think they're just giving up? They've retreated now, but we both know what they're capable of." "I'm not waiting to find out," Seraphina replied. "I'll personally lead a strike against their supply lines, hit them where it hurts." As the fleet began to recover, the crew worked with a renewed sense of urgency. Engineers scrambled to reroute power, make repairs and stabilize the Vanguard systems. Medics tended to the wounded, and the bridge officers assessed the tactical situation with precision. However, even as the Vanguard limped toward its next objective, Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced at the view screen, where the stars blinked in their eternal, indifferent silence. Her fingers drummed against her armrest, a nervous habit she developed during the many sleepless nights in command. "Admiral, there's something you should see," Lieutenant Orwin said, his voice sharp with concern. Seraphina turned toward him, her mind snapping into focus. "What is it?" He pointed to the display. "It's a distress signal. From the Righteous Flame, a cruiser in the second wave. They've gone dark." The transmission was barely coming through. Static crackled, but Seraphina could make out enough to know it was a desperate call for help. "Under attack, surrounded, they're too many, can't hold out, Righteous Flame, all hands, we need reinforcements." The message ended abruptly and the screen went blank. "They're out there," Orwin muttered. "We can't just leave them." Seraphina's jaw tightened. "No, we won't. I'll be damned if I let them die out here." The distress signal was coming from a nearby sector, one that was strategically important. If the Righteous Flame was surrounded, it would be impossible to get reinforcements in time. The Zalari were moving faster than they expected, sweeping in, striking where least expected. Set a course for the righteous flame's last known coordinates. We're going in, Serafina ordered. Kyle Orwin hesitated for a split second, then nodded. Aye, Admiral. Course plotted. As the Vanguard's engines hummed back to life, Serafina felt a surge of dread mixed with purpose. She had just sent a fleet into a battle they could barely survive, and now she was sending them into another. But she couldn't allow a ship in need to fall without a fight. Not when humanity's future was at stake. The stars around them seemed too calm, too serene. Yet the peace was an illusion. A storm was coming and humanity had no choice but to face it head-on. They had no choice but to strike before the Zalari could. The Vanguard cut through space at full speed, its engines roaring to life. The battle was far from over, and Serafina knew this would only be the beginning of a much larger conflict. As the fleet made its way toward the coordinates, Serafina allowed herself a fleeting thought of the Righteous Flame's crew, brave, willing to risk everything for the cause. She couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. The enemy was coming for them all. And it was time for humanity to remind the galaxy that they would never back down. The Vanguard sliced through the black expanse of space, its engines thrumming steadily, though still weakened by the recent battle. The distress signal from the Righteous Flame had been their last hope, a desperate cry for help from a ship stranded in the heart of enemy territory. Serafina's eyes never left the stars ahead. The coordinates blinked on the navigation panel, growing closer with every second. She could feel the weight of their mission bearing down on her shoulders. The odds were slim, but she would not allow another ship to fall if there was even the slightest chance of saving them. Admiral, Kyle Orwin's voice broke through the tension on the bridge. We're nearing the Righteous Flame's last known position. Long-range sensors are picking up multiple enemy ships in the vicinity. Serafina nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. The Zalari would not let their prey escape. If the Righteous Flame was still alive, it was only because the enemy had allowed it to live. For now. The Terran fleet had been fractured, scattered across vast distances, but they could not waste any more time. Reinforcements would take too long. The Vanguard would have to go in alone. Deploy the fighter squadrons, she ordered. We need to give them a chance to break free if we can distract the Zalari long enough. Aye, Admiral, said her chief pilot, Lieutenant Mira Talon. Squadrons are ready for launch. Moments later, the hangar bay doors opened with a loud hiss and the Terran fighters, sleek and deadly, ripped through the atmosphere of the bridge's viewport, darting toward the blackness of space. Each ship was a swarm of calculated destruction, led by human hands that never faltered. Admiral, Lieutenant Talon continued, her voice laced with urgency, I'm detecting a large Zalari fleet formation in the vicinity. There's no way we can avoid them at this speed. Then we'll make our own path, Serafina said, her voice cold with determination. Change course. We need to take them head-on and create a diversion. Our priority is the Righteous Flame. Get us within striking distance. The Vanguard turned sharply, its hull groaning under the stress of the quick maneuver. The bridge trembled slightly as the ship accelerated, drawing the attention of the nearby Zalari forces. She could see them now, distant shadows among the stars, their sleek forms cutting through space with deadly precision. But they hadn't noticed her ship yet, not with the flurry of Terran fighters buzzing like hornets around their formation. Serafina's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. Hail the Righteous Flame, she ordered, her voice calm but intense. Tell them we're coming. The communications officer quickly established a connection, though the signal was faint and fragmented. The voice of Captain Maria Vallon crackled through the static. This is Righteous Flame. Admiral Holt, we're surrounded, can't hold, too many? Serafina cut in, her voice resolute. We're coming in hot. Prepare to engage at full speed. We'll extract you. There was a brief pause, then Vallon's voice came through, shaky but grateful. Understood, Admiral. Make it quick. We can't take much more. Stay alive, Captain, Serafina replied sharply before cutting the transmission. The Vanguard was now within range of the Zalari ships. Their enormous, powerful forms loomed on the horizon, like predators closing in on their prey. They were numerous, and their weaponry would rip through the Vanguard in moments if they didn't act fast. We're about to enter their weapons range, Admiral, Kyle warned. Get us close, Serafina commanded. And make sure they know we're here. The Vanguard surged forward, its remaining engines pushing it to their limits. The Zalari noticed them now, an unyielding threat cutting across the void. A stream of plasma fire shot from one of the enemy dreadnoughts, streaking toward the Vanguard, but Serafina was already on it. Evasive maneuvers. Now, she barked. The ship veered sharply to the right, the fire trailing just behind. But it wasn't enough to avoid the next attack. The ship shook violently as a near miss sent a ripple of force through the hull. Sparks flew from the console, and the crew scrambled to maintain control. Shields holding at 15%, Orwin reported, his voice strained. We're almost there, Admiral. Fighter squads on my mark, Serafina said, her hand hovering over the comms. Take out their flank. We'll punch through the middle. As the Vanguard cut a path through the Zalari fleet, the Terran fighter squadrons engaged with deadly precision. Explosions erupted as they tore into the Zalari formations, distracting their larger ships just long enough to give the Vanguard the opening it needed. Now! Serafina shouted. The Vanguard opened fire, its weapons lighting up the void with flashes of blinding light. The Zalari dreadnoughts responded with retaliatory fire, but their formation was thrown into disarray. The Terran ship dodged and weaved, using its agility to cut through the enemy lines like a blade through paper. Another violent jolt rocked the Vanguard as a missile from a nearby Zalari cruiser slammed into its starboard side. The shields flickered and alarms blared. The Vanguard staggered, but Serafina held her ground, unwavering. Damage report, she demanded. Starboard side compromised. Hull integrity at 60%. Kyle shouted, his voice tight with urgency. We're losing power to auxiliary systems. We have to finish this. Just a little longer, Serafina muttered under her breath. We'll make it. We're almost there. And then, like a beacon in the storm, the righteous flame appeared through the chaos. Its once proud shape was battered and scorched, but it was still afloat, barely. The Zalari had surrounded it, but it had not yet fallen. The Vanguard closed the gap, firing another round of ion blasts into the enemy formations to buy the cruiser time. Righteous flame, we're here. Prepare for extraction. Serafina shouted. Understood, Admiral. The last of our engines are failing. Hurry. Captain Valen's voice crackled over the comms. The Vanguard shifted into position, keeping the enemy off the righteous flame's back. The fighter squadrons were working in tandem, drawing fire and cutting down the Zalari ships that dared come too close. Serafina's eyes flicked between the sensors and the forward view screen. The righteous flame was moving closer now, slowly, painfully, as its crew scrambled to escape. Then, the comms officer's voice rang out with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Admiral! A large enemy fleet is incoming, reinforcements. Damn it, Serafina muttered, but she didn't flinch. All hands prepare for the worst. Get that ship out of here now. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the Vanguard had done what it came to do. The righteous flame was on its way to safety. Humanity had struck back and it had cost them dearly. And Serafina knew one thing. The Zalari had only just begun to realize what they were up against. The Vanguard had barely begun to pull away from the stricken righteous flame when the first wave of Zalari reinforcements arrived. The black expanse of space, once quiet and filled with the promise of escape, was now an inferno of lasers, explosions, and the deafening sound of an impending death knell. The Zalari had regrouped faster than anyone had anticipated. Admiral? Kyle Orwin's voice rang out, sharp with alarm. The enemy's reinforcements are much larger than we expected. We're outnumbered nearly 3-1. Serafina's eyes narrowed. She had known the Zalari wouldn't let this fight go so easily. But now, with the righteous flame safe, its engines sputtering but functional, her mission had been completed. It was time to make sure her crew would survive to fight another day. Prepare the engines for evasive maneuvers, Serafina said, her voice calm but unwavering. We're not staying here to be slaughtered. The Vanguard lurched forward, cutting through the wreckage of the battlefield. The Zalari ships were already closing in, their jagged forms cutting through the darkness with unrelenting precision. It was only a matter of time before they caught up with the Vanguard, and when they did, the odds were not in humanity's favor. Can we jump to hyperspace? Orwin asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Serafina hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking to the tactical map. Their rear shields were failing. The Vanguard wasn't fast enough to outrun them, not with the state of their engines. Hyperspace travel was too risky. If the Zalari hit them while they were in the jump, they'd be sitting ducks. We don't have the luxury, Serafina said quietly, her fingers tightening on the command chair's armrest. But we'll make them regret chasing us. The Vanguard continued its rapid, unpredictable maneuvers, trying to throw off the incoming enemy fire. The smaller Zalari ships darted around them with deadly speed, unleashing torrents of plasma and energy weapons at their rear. Serafina's crew did their best to retaliate, But the overwhelming force of the Zalari fleet left little room for success. "We need a new plan, Admiral," Kyle urged, his voice tight with the strain of the battle. "The longer we stay here, the more likely they'll destroy us. We can't keep this up." Serafina's mind was racing, calculating and recalculating every scenario. She could see the darkness of space closing in on them. The Zalari were closing the noose and time was running out. They were cornered, and unless something drastic happened, they would soon be reduced to nothing but dust and shattered metal. She couldn't afford to lose her nerve. Not now. "Lieutenant Talon," Serafina said, turning to the chief pilot. "Can you take us through that asteroid field just ahead?" Talon's hands moved rapidly over her controls, her eyes scanning the field of space debris on the screen. It was a dangerous gambit. The asteroid field was dense, with rocks the size of small cities floating haphazardly in the void. If they went in too fast, they would collide with the asteroids, causing catastrophic damage. But if they played it right, they could use the rocks as cover to outmaneuver the Zalari. "We'll need precision," Talon said, her voice filled with determination. "I can do it, but I'll need you to buy me some time." "We'll give you everything we've got," Serafina promised. Her hands clenched into fists. She knew this was their only shot. The Zalari wouldn't hesitate. They would hunt the Vanguard to the end of the universe if it meant wiping out humanity's last resistance. "Tactical," Serafina barked. "Prepare to deploy all remaining heavy ordnance. I want to create a diversion." "Understood," the tactical officer replied, his fingers moving quickly across the console. "We have limited missiles left, but we can fire them in quick bursts to confuse the enemy and give us some space." The Vanguard roared into the asteroid field, the ship rocking violently as plasma fire from the Zalari ships burned through the darkness. It was chaotic, dangerous, humanity's survival hanging by a thread. "Deploying missiles," the tactical officer called. The first volley of missiles streaked out from the Vanguard's launchers, arcing toward the approaching enemy. Explosions lit up the surrounding field as the Zalari ships were momentarily distracted, their advanced targeting systems thrown off by the sudden chaos. The missiles exploded in rapid succession, sending debris and shrapnel in every direction. It wasn't enough to damage the larger Zalari ships, but it was enough to slow their pursuit. "We've got some breathing room," Kyle shouted. "But it won't last long." Serafina's eyes never left the field ahead. The asteroid debris was now a shield, a labyrinth that would either save them or doom them. "Lieutenant Talon, you're up," she said, her voice firm. Without a moment's hesitation, Talon punched the controls, guiding the Vanguard into a daring maneuver. The ship weaved through the asteroid field, twisting and darting between enormous chunks of rock and metal. The Zalari ships attempted to follow, but the dense field slowed them down. "Hold on," Talon shouted as the Vanguard grazed the edge of a massive asteroid, sending a shockwave through the ship. The Vanguard swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision. The crew tensed, but Serafina's gaze remained steady. They had to keep moving. They couldn't afford to stop. For a few minutes, it seemed like the Vanguard had lost the Zalari, at least for now. The pursuing ships had fallen behind, unable to match the Terran ship's speed and agility within the asteroid field. The Vanguard was a predator in its element, small, agile, and unpredictable, while the Zalari were lumbering giants. But it wasn't over yet. The Zalari would regroup. They would adapt. And when they did, Serafina knew they would be ready. "Admiral," Kyle called, his voice tinged with a note of relief, "we've shaken them for now. The asteroid field should provide us cover for the time being." Serafina exhaled slowly, but she didn't allow herself to relax. "Good. But we're not done yet. Plot a course to the nearest Terran stronghold. We need to warn command. The Zalari will be back, and next time, we won't have a choice but to face them head-on." "Understood," Kyle replied, his fingers flying across the console. Serafina looked out at the vast field of floating rocks around them. It was a fleeting moment of calm in the eye of a storm. The Zalari would be back. But humanity had proven its resolve. They had bought themselves time, but only time. And time, as Serafina knew, was the most precious thing they had left. The Vanguard was a ghost in the night. Its battered hull glinted faintly as it coasted through the darkness of space, the asteroid field behind them now a distant memory. It was a temporary victory, one that bought them time but not safety. The Zalari would regroup and they would be back. The brief sense of relief that had settled over the crew after their narrow escape had begun to fade, replaced by the grim reality of what lay ahead. Admiral Serafina Holt stood at the edge of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The quiet hum of the ship was almost deafening in its stillness. The Vanguard's crew had repaired what they could, hull breaches sealed, energy rerouted and weapon systems recalibrated, but it wasn't enough. The ship was still running on borrowed time. The Zalari threat had proven more formidable than they had anticipated, and despite their success, Serafina knew they couldn't keep outrunning them forever. "Admiral, we've established a course for Terran Command. Estimated time of arrival is just under 48 hours, Kyle Orwin's voice interrupted her thoughts. Serafina nodded without turning around. "Good. We need that time. We'll need to regroup and Command needs to know everything we've learned. The Zalari aren't just a military threat, there's something else. They know how to adapt, how to anticipate. It's like they've been waiting for us." Orwin hesitated, sensing the tension in her words. "You think they've been preparing for this war all along?" "I don't think we're the first target they've had," Serafina said, turning to face him. "Humanity is just another player in their larger game. What they did to the Seraphim's wrath, that wasn't just a defeat to them. That was a message. A warning." The bridge fell into a heavy silence as Serafina's words lingered in the air. The Vanguard was limping toward Terran Command, and though they had survived the Zalari's initial attack, the war was far from over. Suddenly, the communications officer's voice broke the silence, sharp and urgent. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. It's encrypted but the signal's coming through clear." "Patch it through," Serafina ordered, her pulse quickening. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, intel from Command. Her hands instinctively clenched into fists as the holographic screen flickered to life in front of her. A familiar face appeared, grizzled and tired, but with the unmistakable look of a seasoned officer, Admiral Thomas Gray, the commander of the Terran Defense Fleet. "Admiral Holt, I trust you're still in one piece?" Gray's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with exhaustion. "We're holding up, Admiral," Serafina replied, her tone steady. "We've sustained heavy damage but we've got the righteous flame under our protection, and we're heading back to Command for repairs and intel. We've got to warn you, the Zalari are unlike anything we've faced before." Gray's gaze hardened. "I've seen the reports. We've had skirmishes in the outer sectors but nothing like what you've described. We're preparing for a larger offensive but we're spread thin. I need you to give me more, Admiral. Tell me what you know about the Zalari. How are they coordinating? What are their weaknesses?" Serafina paused, her mind racing as she recalled the harrowing moments they'd survived. She could still see the wreckage of the Seraphim's wrath, the brutal efficiency of the Zalari strike, the terrifying speed of their reinforcements. "They're tactical masterminds," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Their coordination is flawless. They anticipate our every move, adapt to our tactics and counteract almost immediately. Their technology is far beyond ours, but their real advantage is in their strategic minds. They don't fight for victory, they fight for annihilation. They don't want just a loss, they want to erase us entirely. And their ships, they're built for it. Advanced weaponry, impenetrable shields and enough firepower to wipe out entire fleets." Gray was silent for a long moment, absorbing her words. "And what about weaknesses? Every enemy has one." Serafina exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Their technology is advanced but I don't think it's infallible. Their ships are powerful but they rely heavily on tight formations. If you can fracture their lines cause enough disruption they lose some of their edge. We've seen their ships falter when they're forced to fight in disarray. But that requires precision. We don't have the firepower for a full-on assault, but with the right strategy we can hit them where it hurts." Gray's expression darkened, a flicker of concern passing across his face. "Understood. We'll prepare for an engagement strategy based on that intel. But we need more time, Serafina. The outer colonies are falling. We can't afford to wait much longer. If we don't strike back soon, the Zalari will have us cornered. You'll have to get to Fleet Command and we'll coordinate an immediate response." "We'll be there as quickly as we can," Serafina promised, her resolve hardening. "Don't take too long, Admiral," Gray warned. "The clock is ticking. And if you need reinforcements, let us know." "I'll keep you updated," Serafina said, nodding sharply. The transmission cut off and the bridge fell silent once more. Serafina's mind whirred as she processed the intel. Fleet Command was preparing for a larger offensive, but they were spread thin. Every second they wasted, the Zalari were growing stronger, consolidating their hold on the galaxy. Her task was clear: get to Fleet Command, give them the information they needed, and hope it was enough. "Admiral," Kyle Orwin spoke up, his voice quiet but urgent. "We're approaching the edge of the sector. The Zalari have likely already set up patrols. We need to be careful." Serafina nodded, turning to face him. "Agreed. We can't afford to be discovered before we get to command. Plot a course around the patrol routes. We'll go dark. The Vanguard drifted into the shadows of space, its lights dimming, systems throttled down to their lowest settings. The ship moved silently, a specter of the war that was raging across the galaxy. The crew was alert, but exhaustion hung heavy in the air. They had made it this far, but Serafina knew they couldn't let their guard down. The Zalari could be anywhere. As the Vanguard moved deeper into the void, heading toward Fleet Command's rendezvous point, Serafina allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The stakes had never been higher. The Zalari weren't just an enemy, they were a force of nature, one that would sweep across the stars until nothing was left. Humanity's survival depended on the decisions they made in the coming days. And Serafina was determined that they wouldn't go down without a fight. The storm was coming. And this time they wouldn't be running. The Vanguard crept through the cold vacuum of space, cloaked in darkness, its every system on standby. Serafina Holt stood silently on the bridge, eyes fixed on the swirling abyss beyond the viewport. The stars, distant pinpricks of light, seemed to mock her as if they knew the storm was coming. The silence on the bridge was deafening, broken only by the occasional hiss of a strained system or the faint hum of the ship's engines. Despite their near-crippled state, the crew remained vigilant, aware that the slightest misstep could lead to their destruction. They were within range of Fleet Command now, but getting there would be no easy task. The Zalari had begun deploying patrol fleets in the area, and Serafina knew the risk of discovery was growing with every passing moment. "Admiral," Kyle Orwin's voice cut through the tension. "We're approaching Fleet Command's rendezvous point. However, our long-range sensors are picking up a large concentration of Zalari ships near the sector. They're not exactly patrolling, they're lying in wait." Serafina stiffened, her mind racing. The Zalari had anticipated their every move. No surprise there, they were calculating, ruthless. If they'd been waiting for the Vanguard, it meant they knew humanity's only hope was in the hands of their Fleet Command. The game had changed again. "We're too close to turn back," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "But we can't just walk into their trap." Orwin's voice was resolute, though tinged with concern. "Admiral, if we try to engage them head-on, we won't make it. Our shields are almost down and the fighters can only cover us for so long. We need a distraction, something that'll force their focus away from us long enough for Fleet Command to receive our intel." Serafina's gaze flickered to the tactical map. The Zalari fleet was massive, more than she'd ever seen before. They were lying in wait, calculating the exact moment when humanity would come too close. The Vanguard might be able to dodge them for a while, but without reinforcements the odds were against them. "Prepare the fighters," Serafina said with quiet determination. "Get them ready for a diversionary strike. If we can buy ourselves enough time to send a message, then we do whatever it takes." Lieutenant Talon's voice crackled from the comms. "We'll make it work, Admiral. We've got a plan in mind." Serafina turned to face the crew. "Listen up," she began, her voice firm. "We are facing an enemy that adapts faster than we can react. But we know one thing, the Zalari aren't invincible. If we strike at their weaknesses we have a chance. We're going to make this our final stand, and we're going to make it count." The crew exchanged brief, meaningful looks. They had fought tooth and nail to survive this far. But they all knew this wasn't just a fight for the Vanguard or the righteous flame. This was a fight for the survival of humanity itself. "We have one shot at this," Serafina continued. "The diversion will only last for a few minutes, so it's vital that Fleet Command receives the intel from the righteous flame. It's not just about surviving anymore. It's about ensuring they can fight back. We hold them off long enough and Fleet Command can mobilize. If we fail here, humanity falls." Her voice cracked with intensity, but she held it together. There was no room for fear, only resolve. The crew nodded in unison. They had all made the same vow when they enlisted, to protect humanity no matter the cost. The Vanguard surged forward, gliding into position behind a dense asteroid cluster. Serafina watched the sensors carefully, her eyes scanning the field for any sign of movement. The Zalari fleet had already spotted their approach, but they had no idea what was coming. The Terran fighters, tiny but lethal, dropped out from the Vanguard's hangar bays, soaring into the darkness like a swarm of angry hornets. They darted between asteroids, drawing the attention of the Zalari ships. The first volley of fire from the Terran fighters exploded into the Zalari's flank, causing a wave of disarray among the smaller vessels. The larger dreadnoughts shifted their focus, targeting the oncoming assault. For a moment, their massive guns fired at the tiny fighters, causing sparks and explosions in every direction. The Vanguard used this chaos to break through the enemy's lines, punching toward Fleet Command's position. "Admiral?" Orwin's voice rang out. "We've successfully transmitted the intel to Fleet Command. The message has gone through." Serafina let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, but there was no time to relax. The Zalari had regrouped quickly. Their larger dreadnoughts, now aware of the Vanguard's intentions, began closing in, their weapons charging up for a final strike. "We're not out of this yet," Serafina said, eyes hardening. "Fighter squadrons, prepare for a final push. We'll give Fleet Command enough time to mobilize. This ends now." The Vanguard turned to face the oncoming threat, unleashing all its remaining weaponry. Ion beams and plasma projectiles streaked through space, ripping into the approaching Zalari ships. The Terran fighters followed suit, executing a synchronized assault to maximize damage. But even as their weapons blazed through the void, Serafina knew the reality. This was the last battle. The Vanguard couldn't win against this many enemies. Not without reinforcements. But she wasn't fighting for victory anymore, she was fighting for survival. For humanity's future. Then, something unexpected happened. A ripple in space. "Admiral?" Orwin cried. "We're picking up a massive energy signature, coming from behind us. It's another fleet." Serafina's heart skipped a beat as a new, unfamiliar fleet appeared through the void, emerging from hyperspace with terrifying speed. The ships were sleek, well-armed, and unmistakably human. "Fleet Command," Kyle exclaimed. "They've arrived just in time." The Terran reinforcements poured into the battlefield, their sheer firepower pushing the Zalari fleet back. The Vanguard immediately pivoted, joining the larger forces in the fight to crush the invaders. The Zalari, caught off guard by the reinforcements, were now fighting a battle on two fronts. "Keep pressing the attack," Serafina shouted, her eyes gleaming with a newfound fire. For humanity. The tide was finally turning. The Zalari had underestimated Terran resilience. They had underestimated the will of humanity to survive, to fight back. As the battle raged on, Serafina stood tall, knowing this was not just a victory, it was the beginning of a new chapter in the war. The Zalari had thought they could conquer the stars, but they hadn't counted on the fight humanity had in its blood. The Vanguard had done its job, and now humanity's forces were ready to finish the fight. And this time they wouldn't stop until the stars themselves belonged to them.